What's going on, sports card hobby family? We are back again. It is another day. It is another sports card video. Thanks very much for joining me here today. If you're new here, you're looking for just about daily sports card collectibles type content, then friends, you have come to the right place. Also connect with me on IG at SportsCardDad. Today we're going to be talking about the simple fact of what if a particular card does not have a collector home?
You take the card and put it in the sleeve. You take the card and put it in the sleeve. You take the card and put it in the sleeve. You take the card and put it in the sleeve.
An orphaned card, if you will. What happens to those cards? We will dive right in. Huge thanks to today's video sponsor, Comc.com, your home for buying, selling, and flipping all the hottest trading cards. Their consignment marketplace now home to over 32 million cards from baseball's biggest stars like Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge, and Mookie Betts to Marvel favorites like Spider-Man, Thor, and Captain America. Comc has something for every type of collector, so make sure to visit Comc.com today. I will have links down below in the video description as well as in the pinned comments to build out your collection with all of your favorites. So definitely check out Comc down below. All right, you've heard of the 80s and 90s cards, a lot of them as the junk wax era, and a lot of talk today about the junk slab era. PSA, the company grading the most cards right now, is at 1 million cards a month, 1 million plus and steady, really for the last, 18 months? It's no joke. And then you've got all the other grading companies, SGC, BGS, what's the other one? CGC. They're grading a ton of cards too. So there is just a lot of grading going on. And actually, funny story, my wife's aunt, so I guess my great aunt-in-law, she was like, hey, attic find. We've got all these cards that came. And I'm like, oh, cool, yeah. And she's like, oh, you want to take a look at it? Of course, yeah, why not? Let's take a look and see if we've got any hidden gems. And it's a lot of this sort of thing. It's 89 tops, rookies, and what are the good players. It's literally just commons. I think it's funny. And there's like 25 boxes of this stuff. And, I'm tempted to just put it out in the fire pit, frankly. And I know some people will be like, oh my gosh, you're talking about burning a card? Guys, I could package these up and give them to young people. They're not going to want these. It's not as if there's really like stars. It's not even like there's a random like George Brett, like 89 tops George Brett. There's really it's guys. I picked out a couple cards. I put it on my IG. Tommy John. I've got a bunch of Tommy John cards. Famously Tommy John surgery from this guy. There's just a lot of just commons out there. Commons in the world, especially when you go down to that period. Man, they did not play around with the printers, and there is just absolutely tons of that stuff. And it's really kind of no different today, especially over the last few years with the hobby boom that we saw. If you go back kind of in the mid 2010s, to early 2010s, financial crisis and all that stuff. We talk a lot about 2012 Prism football and basketball. They couldn't sell that stuff. It was not hot off the presses. People were not excited about it. It was just during a time, I think, too, where just the card world wasn't hot then. So it took a while for Prism to really kind of take hold. And if you go kind of 2012 to 2015, it's kind of sleepy. And then 2016 starts to heat up, 17, 18, and print runs and number of parallels start to move up from there. We've shown the graphs on all that stuff. So there's certainly no shortage of cards out there. I would rather give more of a star player today. There's plenty of commons there, that are available that I can give to young people as opposed to the, some of this 80s stuff where it's like, I have never even heard of these guys. Actually, the nostalgia that I get though is when I'm looking through kind of like some of that older stuff and there will be a player that pops up that I forgot about, like Neil Anderson, running back for the Bears. I know that sounds kind of like, who the hell is that? But if you remember, if you go back to 1988, 89, 90, I think he was late 80s, early 90s. But I sent away for his autograph through the mail when I was a kid. So I've got one of his autograph cards. And, Neil Anderson is a guy that's just kind of a forgotten guy. Barry Foster was a running back for the Steelers, forgotten. But he had a few years, though, where he was the man. I always reference, Bobby Hebert with the Saints, Bubby Brister, quarterback for the Steelers. There's these guys out there that you kind of just forget about because there's so many players that come and go, especially in the NFL with such short careers. And so a lot of what you hear now when we're talking about buying and selling singles, especially if you're kind of a dealer or flipper, is find a card that a collector would buy. find a card that's got a collector base, and that's part of kind of your decision making. Is this a player that has a collector base, or you think that they're going to build on their collector base over time, as opposed to just kind of mass speculation? But what about all the cards that don't have that end collector? And there's going to be a lot of those, friends. There's going to be an absolute ton of them. Now, when people say like, oh, and I've made on my, said on my channel too, oh, 95% of cards are going to go down to, a lot of them are going to go down to zero or pennies or whatever. Was always the case though. This isn't some brand new phenomenon. It's easy to say it because it's like, oh, I've got some great take. It's not some like phenomenon. It's always been like that. Going back to the 80s, I can pull out just a stack of cards of guys that you have absolutely never heard of. Even, the rookie cards, the Todd Van Poppels, the Don Mikowskis, Brian Bosworth, bigger than life Brian Bosworth. A lot of these guys, they had kind of like that. They're like the 15 minutes of fame, and then it flames out. But they have cards, and there's excitement around the cards. That is part of the excitement of the hobby, though. So let's just be clear on that. The difference, though, nowadays is people are spending huge money on new products. Back then, you could speculate on 89 Pro Set trying to find Barry Sanders cards, and it was $1 a pack. It was 75 cents a pack. Like, you didn't have to spend your paycheck getting into a break or buying a Raz or buying a hobby box or whatever. You didn't have to do that. And that's really the big difference. So what happens with all these cards and really slabs? There is going to be some massive slab container heading out to the landfill because when we've talked about this, it's either heading into a repack, it's going into a repack. And even with younger people, you could say like, okay, the lower price point slabs, that's great for a younger person getting in. And I totally agree with that. But what inevitably happens, I think, is there's always kind of a look to move up. So maybe you're, 14, 15 years old and I've got kind of a PSA 9 of a random player base card. It's a $5 card in that slab. Eventually, if you stay in, you're kind of, you're trying to work up maybe to a PSA 10 of the same card, or maybe a parallel, of that card, or an autograph of that player. So all those cards eventually, they just keep on moving kind of down the priority list. And where are they going to go? Goodwill, Salvation Army, the landfill. It's just a reality that, this stuff is going to eventually head down towards the sewer system, where Ninja Turtles are inevitably going to be practicing their karate on these cards. It's going to happen. So I think this is just kind of a thing to think about too when we are buying cards for the collection or to flip. If buying cards, period, it's always got to be a thought, I think, of what is the end game for this as far as, is this something I really want to add to my collection, or is this a building block piece that I think that I can move out of here in the short run? Because in the long run, we know what's going to happen with most of this stuff. And so, but I think regardless of your age, you can kind of figure out, okay, there's a plan for this. And I really like the psychology that goes into collecting / investing / hoarding / speculating in this hobby. I like hearing people. Actually, Dakota Sports Cards Anonymous, shout out to him. He put out a video yesterday, I believe, or the day before, but it's kind of a hobby reset. And this is a guy that's collected for 20 plus years. He's not a brand new, pandemic guy that got back in and started on YouTube. He's been doing it for over 20 years. And he is basically just, hey, you know what? I'm wiping it clean. I'm starting with a clean slate. And it's interesting what he's doing. I actually might do a collaboration with him just to kind of talk through that here in the coming weeks. We'll see if time allows. But I would like to catch up with him. I haven't done kind of a live stream or just a recorded deal with him in a while. And he's also a big football card collector. So we'll see if we can get Dakota on. But yeah, no, I think this is kind of an interesting thought debate. It's like, look into the future a little bit and think about when we're buying cards, is this a forever card? And I think that a lot of people are doing that more. And even if it doesn't end up being a forever card for you, it's one of those where it's like, but you were okay with it being a long-term hold for you. Unless you're playing kind of short-term flip game, then that's a whole different thing. But I think if you're, for a lot of the collectors in the space, a collector is really just a long-term holder. That's another name for a collector, is you're collecting something, and regardless of whether you care about value, don't care about value, you are a holder of that thing. So is this something that you can see in your collection, or are you going to look at it and be like, man, I just impulse bought this. Like, I don't really care about this that much, or this player or whatever. I'm not really that interested. I think a lot more people are doing that these days because, look, there is no shortage of eBay listings and cards for sale out there, man. It is a sea, an absolute sea of goodness, a lot of great stuff. But I think that's another thing that is just like, all right, but what is great enough to get into my collection? You know, like we're like the Miami clubs where it's like we're the bouncers at the club and it's like, you know, there's a line out the door, night at the Roxbury. Not everybody's going to get in. You know, most are not going to get into the collection. And I think that's kind of more of the angle that I'm taking and with a lot of people as well. All right, guys, that's all I've got for today. Stay healthy, stay awesome, and I'll talk to you again later.